From a very young age, Lara felt the weight of being different. While other children ran around the courtyard with new sneakers and fashionable backpacks, she walked slowly, as if trying to hide in the sun. The clothes she wore seemed to carry the story of several childhoods before hers. They were faded pieces, too wide or tight in the wrong places, always patched with lines of different colors, as if screaming that she didn't belong there. It wasn't just clothes. They were scars sewn on the body. They came from donations, from anonymous bags delivered to the orphanage gate, mixed with old smells and memories that were never hers. At school, she was the easy target. Mockery spread like dry fire. They called her a ragdoll, a school beggar, a walking rag. Laughter echoed through the hallways, and sometimes even teachers pretended not to hear, as if silence was protection. But it wasn't. It was double abandonment. Lara learned early on to lower her head and move on, because complaining didn't change anything. I felt ashamed, yes, but deep down, more than shame, what I felt was a suffocating desire to prove that I was more than appearance. At the orphanage, the bathroom mirror was small and broken in a corner, but that was where she looked at herself every day. Not with vanity, but with challenge. There were no toys, no colored books, and not much room to dream. But there were patches, old cloths, remnants of curtains, pieces of unused clothes. And there was something even rarer: silence. In that silence of the night, when the other girls were asleep and the noises of the outside world died down, Lara would sit by the window, with a rusty needle she had found by chance, and sew. I sewed without knowing exactly how. I was trying, dismantling, and redoing. Her fingers were pierced. Sometimes they bled, but she wouldn't stop. It was the only time of the day when he felt he was building something of his own. He would take an old t-shirt and turn it into a blouse with improvised ruffles, a torn sheet turned into a skirt. And even if none of this was to be worn on the street, she wore those creations for a few minutes, alone, in front of the cracked mirror, as if she were already on a catwalk that only she could see. Each point, each line, was a way of resisting, to affirm that even when the world said she had no value, she could still create beauty. A beauty that was born from what others threw away. Perhaps that was what motivated her the most, knowing that everything that was discarded could still take on a new form. That was how she saw herself, like a torn fabric that could still be transformed. Deep down, Lara knew she couldn't change what others thought, but she could change what she felt for herself. And that's how the silent strength of someone who refused to be defined by the looks of others was born without anyone noticing. She had no family, no beautiful clothes, no protection. But there was a flame burning inside, a stubborn desire to show the world that even a girl with nothing could be extraordinary. For a long time, this force was hidden, kept between the wooden cracks of the orphanage, among the scribbled notebooks of the school, among the locked cabinets where she hid her creations. But it was enough to look at her eyes to realize Lara carried within her a story that had not yet really begun. It was as if he was waiting for the right moment, the unexpected gap, the instant when everything would change, and that moment would begin to take shape when, unknowingly, she would get her hands on something that would change her trajectory forever. It was just one forgotten piece among many others, but there was something about her that drew attention, and it was from this small discovery that Lara's life would begin to change shape, as if fate, silently, was also sewing the threads of its own transformation. If this story has touched you this far, leave your like and subscribe to the channel. This helps us a lot to continue telling stories like this. The cruel jokes and the scornful looks could have destroyed any child. But Lara was not like the others. There was in it a resistance that could not be explained with words, a kind of luminous stubbornness that was born in silence, like the first spark before the flame. She heard the spiteful nicknames, felt the muffled laughter as she passed down the hallway, endured the disguised shoving and whispering that followed her like a shadow. But every word hurled at her did not crush her. It pushed, with invisible force, into herself, a territory where no one could enter. It was there, in this intimate and protected space, that she transformed humiliation into a dream. When school was over and the orphanage was plunged into fatigue at the end of the day, Lara would take refuge among thin blankets and used notebooks. He would take a broken pencil, and even in the dim light of the community lamp in the hallway, he would draw. He created clothes with meticulous details, folds he had never touched, fabrics he only knew through his imagination. He scribbled hungrily, as if writing a secret future. On the worn pages, there were long dresses, full skirts, jackets with daring cuts, models that looked like they came out of shows she had never attended. Because, even without understanding fashion, Lara saw beauty where no one else did. And the most curious thing is that she didn't copy, she created. He drew inspiration from the trees he saw through the window, from the flowers in the orphanage's dry bed, from the clippings of old magazines left in the school library. It transformed a raindrop into a print, a crack in the wall, into a sewing pattern. His gaze was a magic filter, capable of reconfiguring everything around him. The others saw decadence, she saw opportunity. The others saw garbage, she saw texture. That was how, without realizing it, he built his identity, sewing a new version of herself between the invisible lines of a dream that still had no name. Lara was not a distracted dreamer. He was persistent. He had discipline. Every day, even with tired fingers, he went back to drawing. And on weekends, when the other children played ball or slept late, she asked the orphanage coordinator for leftover cloth. He rummaged through the warehouse for anything he could transform. A dropped button, a broken zipper, a piece of antique curtain. It was all raw material for his private world. I sat on the floor, sewed by hand, undid it and redid it. Without anyone teaching, without anyone noticing, no one except time. Because he started working in her favor. Every day his designs became bolder, his seams firmer. Gradually, Lara began to take risks. I would take an old piece of school uniform and make small adjustments. He cut the hem, tinkered with the sleeves, added details that seemed subtle but made an impact. And even without wanting to attract attention, she began to be noticed. First with disdain, then with curiosity, and finally with a certain embarrassed respect, as if the same people who had laughed before had been forced to look twice. But Lara didn't do it for approval. He did it out of necessity. It was the only way he had found not to go crazy, not to succumb to the weight of abandonment, not to let shame define who she was. Because inside, despite the insults, the worn clothes and the judgmental looks, she knew. She was not an ordinary girl. She knew that the pain had not destroyed her, just polished. And that no one could take away from her. Still, it wasn't easy. With each advance, new barriers came. When she sewed a different skirt to wear on the school trip, she heard even crueler jokes. They said that she wanted to look like a circus performer, that she didn't know how to dress, that she was trying to get attention. And inside, everything hurt, because she just wanted to express herself. I wanted to show the world that I could create something beautiful with leftovers. But it was hard to be really seen when everyone could only see the patches. In the evening, he returned to the orphanage in silence. He lay on his side on the wooden bed, staring at the ceiling as if looking for answers that didn't come. But instead of crying, he picked up the notebook again. He designed another outfit, a long coat with gold details inspired by the sunset he had seen through the bus window. It was his answer. Create whenever the world tries to crush her. And so he went, on in silence, transforming each wound into a new trace. Each offense in an idea. Over time, Lara developed not only the ability to draw, but also a rare intuition. She knew what went with what, even though she had never studied fashion. He had a natural sense of balance, proportion, and style. And most impressively, was how he saw beauty in the imperfect. He made the torn a detail. From wear and tear, a proposal. It was as if he was saying to the world, without words, imperfection can be art. This sensitivity was part of his essence. It came from a very deep place, a place that only knew those who had already been rejected, forgotten, ignored. Lara had no parents to applaud her. She had no real friends to support her. But he had a restless soul, pulsating inside his chest. And that, more than any outside support, was what kept her going. The orphanage remained the same cold walls, the same rigid schedules, the same routine without surprises. But Lara was beginning to see everything differently. Where others saw routine, she saw structure. Where others saw a limit, she saw a frame. Each space became the setting for his imagination, and even if no one else saw it, she already felt different, more confident, more prepared, because even though she was humiliated so many times, she had never been broken. Inside, she was still whole, even stronger, like glass that has been melted again, but now with a unique glow. She learned to rebuild herself without noise. And that perhaps was his greatest weapon, the discretion of its strength, the silence of his revolution. Lara was in no hurry. I knew that big changes start slowly. And even though I didn't know how yet, I felt that at some point all that effort would make sense, as if each hand-sewn stitch is tracing a secret path, a path that only she could take, because it was tailor-made for those who never gave up. It was on an ordinary evening, while rummaging through an old bag of donations left by the orphanage staff, that she found a different piece. It wasn't new, but it didn't look old either. It was of an unusual, firm fabric with a discreet shine. It had strange cuts, as if it had been made by someone experienced, but with non-standard ideas. Lara held the piece in her hands and stood, still for a few seconds, feeling a strange familiarity. She couldn't say why, but something about that outfit spoke to her, as if carrying an unfinished story, an enigma hidden in the seams. And for the first time, she felt that what she had in her hands could be more than just a donation. It could be a clue, a door ajar, one chance. At that moment, a crack flashed through his thoughts like lightning. His heart raced. It wasn't just another outfit, it was different. And Lara, with her heightened sensitivity, immediately realized that it had not appeared there by chance. She picked up the piece, folded it carefully, and hid it under the mattress. It would remain a secret for now. But one certainty was already growing inside her. Something was about to change, and this time it wouldn't just be a drawing in the notebook. It would be real. It was the beginning of something bigger, even if she didn't know the name of it yet. The nights at the orphanage, previously marked by the muffled silence of crying or the cold that pierced the thin blankets, gained another sound, the shy creak of the sewing machine working in secret. Lara waited for everyone to sleep, surrounded by the gloom and the strong smell of fabric stored for a long time, and then plunged into that new world that she was beginning to build with her own hands. The irregular noise of the broken machine did not bother her. On the contrary, it sounded like a whisper, telling her that she was on the right track. Time ceased to exist. Hours passed, and when I realized it was almost morning. Her fingers were red, sometimes cut off, but she kept going, as if each stitch sewn there erased a part of the pain she had carried in her chest since she was a child. The old machine became a confidant. Every bit of cloth, no matter how ugly or dirty it seemed, took on a new meaning when it passed through his hands. She had no molds or refined technique, but she had a powerful intuition. I looked at a fabric and already imagined what it could become. A faded blue patch became a delicate detail on a makeshift collar. A torn sleeve gained new life as a bow. It was pure invention, a joke that became serious. And the more he sewed, the more he realized that there was something bigger than simple clothes. There was a possibility. Even though it was hidden, that refuge began to arouse suspicion. Some colleagues at the orphanage began to notice the small adjustments in their own clothes. A dress that fit badly was suddenly tighter. A dull shirt appeared with a new detail. Lara, unintentionally, was sewing her freedom and at the same time sowing curiosity around. The caregivers also noticed. Instead of scolding her, they began to observe from afar, admiring the persistence of that girl who, even without education, without resources, without family, gave birth to beauty in the midst of abandonment. Lara did not pretend to be a stylist. I didn't even know that this was a possible name. I only knew that I felt something inexplicable when I transformed old things into something new, something of my own. Sewing was not just skill, it was emotional, survival. While others clung to memories or fantasies, she clung to the threads and fabrics, as if she could embroider a new story on them, and in a way, That's exactly what he was doing. One day at a time, one seam per night, one dream at a time. But the discovery of that machine and all that it represented did not mean that the days became easier. The orphanage was harsh, the rules remained strict, and prejudice on the part of some older girls still weighed. Lara heard mean comments, felt skewed looks, but she was no longer shaken as before. It was as if, with each stitch she stitched together, she was shielding herself, creating a new skin, firmer, safer, more herself. He began to draw his own ideas more clearly. She drew inspiration from everything. A fallen leaf in the courtyard, the folds of an old curtain, the uniforms of the caregivers. Sometimes he even scribbled in the margins of school report cards or on the used sheets he picked up from the school's recyclable garbage. The machine, even broken, came to life in her hands. He learned to force some pieces, to improvise others. When a gear got stuck, she would take it apart calmly, exploring patiently, as if it were a puzzle waiting to be solved. This awakened in her a different feeling, something between pride and belonging. For the first time, something was under his control. Something responded to her. It worked because she made it work. And it was precisely in this environment of improvisation and persistence that Lara's identity began to take hold. The girl who was once invisible, who went unnoticed even by her caregivers, now began to leave silent marks in the corridors of the orphanage. A girl who had almost nothing, but still created beauty. That moved everyone. Even the strictest caregivers started to look with more respect. One of them once discreetly left a new roll of thread near the machine. Another brought a bag with old clothes that would be discarded. No one said anything out loud, but those small gestures showed that Lara was no longer alone. She also didn't ask for anything. He never demanded, never complained. I just created. Gradually his room became a clandestine studio, pieces of fabric hanging on the wall, lines organized in reused pots, drawings glued with improvised adhesive tape. It was creative chaos, and there she felt whole. Each new mold, each new makeshift dress was a silent affirmation. She was alive, she was creating, she was existing beyond pain. Some younger girls began to admire her in secret. They observed his nimble hands, his concentrated gaze, his way of seeing beauty where no one else did. And so unintentionally, Lara became an inspiration, but she still didn't realize it. She still sewed as someone seeking refuge, as someone who struggles not to be swallowed by the pain that still pulsated, even if weaker. It was a silent war, sewn line by line, night after night. She knew that sooner or later she would have to leave the orphanage. Age would come, the system was ruthless, and although the fear of the street, of loneliness, of hunger still surrounded her, there was also a new certainty within her. Where there was thread, needle, and a little fabric, there would be chance. There would be a way. The sewing machine, even old, even incomplete, had given him more than practice or distraction. It had given him back something that seemed dead. Hope. But fate, as always, was not predictable. Just as everything seemed to finally find a routine, an unexpected new piece fell on the board of Lara's life. And she didn't know it yet, but that piece would change everything again, in a way that not even the dreams sown in the early hours could predict. The news spread through the city like a wind through door cracks. There would be a parade of local talents, a modest event organized by the Community Association with the support of the municipal school and the Square Fair. For many, it was just a different afternoon, with amateur performances and an improvised catwalk. But for Lara, that ad carried the weight of an unprecedented possibility. For the first time, someone outside the orphanage, someone from the real world, was inviting the unseen to show what they could do. She felt her heart pound as if something was opening up inside. That was not just an event. It was a calling. But it was enough for the excitement to give way to reality, for doubt to appear like a shadow. How could she participate in a fashion show without fabrics, without a studio, without mannequins, without anyone to represent her or even believe in her? The small town was small, yes, but the silent rules still screamed. Anyone growing up in the orphanage knew the invitations weren't really for them. And even if they were, there was no support, there was no incentive, there was no structure. It was as if the chance existed only to be admired from a distance. Still, something inside her was not silent. For days, he tried to ignore that idea, but it insisted like thread stuck in the needle. Every time I passed by the room where I kept the hidden scraps, I felt the call reappear. It was as if the very silence of the machine pushed her forward, so he decided. Not because he was sure, but precisely because he had no more time to waste doubting. The first step was to look for materials. He could not buy anything, but he had an eye trained to find treasures where no one else saw value. He searched the orphanage's old warehouses, asked for torn curtains, looked for discarded jeans, stained blouses, old sheets. Each rejected piece became, for her, a beginning. He washed everything carefully, undid seams patiently, separated fabrics by texture, color and fit. There was no luxury, but there was history. The girls of the orphanage watched from afar at first, as if looking at someone dancing alone in a dark room. But little by little, the dance began to have rhythm. Lara, silent and determined, transformed scraps into pieces of clothing that, although simple, had a soul. It wasn't just recycled clothing. They were armor. They were flags. They were silent screams of someone who had never been seen. And little by little, the girls began to get closer. Some offered help spontaneously. Others, driven by curiosity or the desire to belong to what seemed magical. And Lara, who has always sewed alone, has learned to share. He taught how to sew buttons, how to cut straight, how to thread without embarrassment. It explained the differences between cotton and polyester, showed how a well-made hem could change everything. He was patient but firm. It required care, it demanded delivery, because he knew that parade was more than an event, it was a statement. The days leading up to the parade were a mixture of euphoria and exhaustion. Lara sewed until her fingers hurt, until sleep won over the fabric. Several times I woke up with my forehead glued to the table, my eyes still searching for the unfinished drawing. But it didn't stop. He felt that, for the first time, something he created with his hands could go beyond the walls of the orphanage. It could be seen, felt, experienced by people who did not know it. And that hurt and excited at the same time. She didn't have professional role models, but she had girls with courage. Girls who, like her, learned to walk even without knowing if there was ground. Each one was chosen carefully, not for their beauty or posture, but for the way they looked at themselves in the mirror, for the way they held the fabric as if holding a secret. Lara taught each one how to parade, how to keep their heads up, how to let the clothes speak for them. Because on that day, that was what mattered, to be seen. The parade space was set up in the main square of the city, a makeshift wooden walkway cut through the center like a thread between worlds. There were modest stands, colorful flags, muffled, sound coming from old speakers. For most people, it was just a Saturday afternoon. For Lara, it was the moment when the invisible took shape. When he arrived with his creations wrapped in his arms, many looked on with disdain. After all, what could an orphan present there? Their clothes had no shine, no labels, no trends, but they had something that no one else brought: truth. Each piece told a story of survival. Each seam held a piece of sleepless night. And she knew it. I knew, because it was with pain, haste, and love that everything was born. The time to enter was approaching, and Lara was trembling. Not of fear, but of intensity. It was as if everything was hanging by a thread, and yet that thread was strong enough to support her. The girls were lined up, each with her own piece, her eyes downcast, but their clothes raised like flags. And then the announcement echoed through the loudspeakers. The next collection came from an unlikely place, from within the walls of the orphanage. The first model stepped on the catwalk with restrained steps. The audience murmured, curious. It was a blouse made of curtain and antique lace, paired with a skirt made of recycled denim, and for some reason that is difficult to explain, it worked. It was different. It was remarkable. It was impossible to ignore. The second girl entered, then the third. And with each new piece the murmur increased. There were no bright lights, no heavy makeup. But there was courage. There was presence. Lara, watching from the sidelines, felt something growing inside her. What was once just a refuge now presented itself as art. The audience, little by little, fell silent, not out of politeness but out of respect. Because it was impossible not to be touched by what was so raw, so sincere. Some looked on in amazement, others with admiration. There were those who smiled, there were those who held back their tears, and among them there were also those who began to realize something new. Talent does not come from the cradle. Talent is not limited to what is bought, taught, or legitimized by the spotlight. Sometimes it is born from the ground, from lack, from pain. And it shines brighter precisely because it was never allowed to exist. When the last model crossed the runway, wearing a dress made from pieces of hand-embroidered sheet, the silence was broken by an unexpected round of applause. It was not euphoria. It was recognition. A type of applause that is not given out of obligation but out of emotion. Lara remained where she was, without climbing, without showing off. She didn't need to, because each stitch sewn spoke for itself. Each line told a part of his journey. The show, which began as an unlikely dream, had turned into a statement, a scar exposed with beauty, an open door to the impossible. But while the audience was still applauding, while the girls in the orphanage hugged and laughed as if they had won an invisible war, Lara looked ahead, not for the stage, but beyond. Because something was changing, and she felt it. The seam that saved her now pushed her towards something greater, something that I still didn't know how to name, but that already pulsated like a firm seam in the fabric of life. It was then, as they dismantled the structures, that a different gaze crossed hers, a look that carried questions, possibilities, and a silent proposal. A look that seemed to see finally what so many had ignored for so long. And so, without promises, without certainties, a new line began to form. In the midst of the dispersal that followed the parade, as the crowd began to disperse and voices turned to whispers of commentary and speculation, there was a watchful eye that remained fixed on Lara's creations. Among the guests, a woman whose presence would almost go unnoticed by most carried a different air, something that went beyond simple casual interest or social courtesy. She was a renowned stylist, one of those few people who, throughout their careers, built fame not only for their talent, but for the ability to perceive the extraordinary where others saw the ordinary. She was known for seeing beyond appearances, for identifying uncut gems in the midst of what the market often rejected. While the applause still echoed in the open space of the square, this woman watched with an almost reverent attention the pieces that Lara had sewn with so much sacrifice. She didn't just see clothes. I saw stories intertwined in each crooked line. I perceived the boldness that defied standards. I felt the sensitivity that shone through in the care for details. Each dress made of old patchwork, each skirt composed of pieces of patched jeans, came to life in her mind as a unique narrative of resistance and creativity. For her, it was not just an amateur parade. It was a revelation, a new voice in fashion that did not come from the big cities or the trendy catwalks, but from an invisible space, almost forgotten, where talent sprang from nothing. While ordinary guests were still arguing among themselves about who would win the event's awards, this woman saw something that surpassed any competition. The raw authenticity of a designer who not only followed trends, but reinvented them. Backstage, while Lara gathered her few things and tried to accommodate the whirlwind of emotions that the burst of courage brought her, the stylist approached with a firm step and a discreet smile. She wasn't the type to use empty words or easy compliments. He spoke objectively, with the clarity of those who know exactly what they are looking for. And when his words reached Lara's ears, they seemed to fall like a warm breath in the middle of a cold night. "You have a rare gift," she said, in a calm but meaningful voice. "Do you want to intern with me in my brand?" At that moment, time seemed to slow down for Lara. Each word seemed to carry an invisible force, capable of breaking through the barriers she believed existed between her and her dreams. Never before had anyone seen in her what she herself had so often doubted to possess. The invitation was not just a recognition, it was a wide-open door to a world she didn't even dare to imagine. The possibility of learning, growing, and transforming his art, which until then had been hidden among scraps and sleepless nights, gained body and perspective. Unbelief mingled with an overwhelming wave of hope. It was as if a spark lit a flame that she did not know existed. Suddenly the future ceased to be a nebulous space, full of uncertainties and limitations, to become a fertile ground where their talents could flourish. That proposal was more than a professional chance. It was a deep recognition, an appreciation that no words could summarize. At the same time, deep in her chest, Lara felt a mixture of anxiety and determination. That would not be an easy path, nor free of challenges, but now there was a reason to fight with even more will. The seam that had sustained her until then now became a connecting line between the past and what was to come. And the designer, with her gaze that seemed to unveil the invisible, was not just an open door, it was the first step towards a destiny that Lara was beginning to accept as possible. While the echoes of the parade still pulsated in the square, and the girls of the orphanage embraced each other between smiles and tears, Lara carried with her the silent promise that her story was changing. That look that discovered her was much more than a momentary gesture. It was the beginning of a profound transformation, and even though she still didn't know exactly where it would take her, something inside her knew that this meeting had marked the beginning of a new chapter, where the invisible would begin to be seen, heard, and celebrated. The sewing of life now gained a new thread, stronger, more vibrant, ready to be woven with courage and passion, and what had previously seemed impossible began to unfold before his eyes. The invitation to intern at the famous brand marked a definitive turning point in Lara's life, but the path that opened before her was far from a fairy tale. The fashion world, which so often seemed bright and charming, now revealed its cruelest and most ruthless sides. Upon entering that sophisticated universe, full of inflated egos and silent disputes, Lara realized that she would have to face much more than the technical challenges of sewing and design. At every step, I felt the weight of expectations and often the coldness of those who were not willing to accept a girl from nowhere, without pedigree, without formal academic training, without a success story to tell. At first, the doors opened, but the voices around him murmured doubts and disbelief. Whispers like, "She won't be able to handle the pressure. She's just a lucky orphan. There's no way around it. She lacks the preparation that these environments require," were like invisible blades cutting through her confidence, trying to make her doubt herself. However, what for many would be a reason for giving up, for Lara was fuel. She had already known the weight of rejection on her skin, and now, with the opportunity she could hardly believe she had at hand, she wouldn't allow anything to bring her down. His days began to be filled with a frenetic pace, where rest seemed a distant luxury. Lara dove headlong into everything she could learn about fabrics, textures, patterns, and techniques. In books, videos, and with the brand's own professionals, he absorbed knowledge with an insatiable thirst. Her ability to sew, which had previously been limited to the scraps of the orphanage, now expanded into creations that sought to unite technique and feeling, precision and soul. She didn't just want to produce beautiful clothes. He wanted each piece to tell his story, to carry the marks of his trajectory of struggle and overcoming. The criticism, which for many would be an almost unbearable burden, became for her stimuli to go further. When someone pointed out her flaws, Lara wrote them down in her head and dedicated herself to turning each weakness into strength. He learned not to listen to mean comments as absolute truths, but rather as challenges that needed to be overcome, with work and passion. The pressure, the fear of making mistakes, and the constant feeling of being watched turned into silent allies that propelled her forward. The intense routine of the internship was marked by long nights, where the silence of the stylist's house and the hum of the sewing machine accompanied her dedication. Between stretched fabrics and intertwining threads, Lara felt that she was sewing more than clothes. She was sewing her own destiny. Each new technique she learned was a step toward an autonomy she never imagined she had. Every hand-drawn design, every delicate fit, every new piece finished was a silent affirmation that she could be more than the label the world insisted on sticking on her forehead. Despite the difficulty, the feeling of belonging began to emerge, albeit in a timid way. Gradually, colleagues who had previously looked on with disdain began to notice the talent and determination that emanated from Lara. His unique style, which blended the simplicity of his origins with a creative boldness that few could match, was beginning to make an impact. It was not an easy competition, much less a linear walk, but every day the girl who sewed alone among the rags of the orphanage conquered a little more of her space. In addition to technical skills, Lara also had to learn to navigate a universe of complex relationships. Fashion was not only made of needles and threads, but of interests, alliances, and often power games. She discovered that in order to survive there, she needed to develop a different sensibility, the ability to understand not only tissues, but people, to notice subtleties, to remain calm when tensions increased. This part of learning was invisible, but crucial for those who wanted to go beyond mere craft and earn their place in the sun. With each collection, with each internal fashion, Lara showed more of her potential. She was not just seeking approval. He wanted to impress with his originality, with the depth he put into each creation. Sewing had become a language, a means of expression where each stitch conveyed an emotion, a piece of its history. They were not clothes to cover bodies, but to reveal souls. This feeling guided his hands, made his gaze more attentive and his heart firmer in the face of obstacles. Still, the doubts did not completely disappear. In many moments, physical and emotional fatigue threatened to take over, and the loneliness of the first months in the new environment was present. The feeling of being the girl from the orphanage hovered like a shadow that, no matter how hard, she tried to push it away, insisted on accompanying her. However, this shadow no longer defined who she was. It was just a part of the past, a chapter she was determined to turn into just one of the lines of her larger narrative. The fashion world, with all its glitz and glamour, also carried its pitfalls, and Lara would need to learn to deal with it. It was not enough to be talented. It was necessary to be strong, intelligent, and resilient. But that strength came from what no one could take away: his history, his scars, and the unbreakable will not to let the world decide his value. Behind the runway lights and camera flashes, there was a girl who had learned to sew not only clothes, but her own freedom. Each step taken there was a reaffirmation that talent alone was not enough. It took courage to face the unknown, to stay true to herself even when everything seemed to conspire against her. And Lara, with her calloused hands and open heart, walked exactly this path, sewing not only the fabric, but her own destiny, thread by thread, stitch by stitch. The journey would not be easy, but it had already begun, and nothing could extinguish the flame that now burned within her. In this universe where every detail could make a difference, sewing was transformed into silent poetry, and the girl from the orphanage discovered that true luxury was not in expensive fabrics, but in authenticity and the courage to create something that was only hers. The search for excellence was mixed with the desire to tell her story to the world, and every day the dream became less distant and more palpable, even when the challenges seemed to want to turn off the light she carried. It was a delicate balance, a constant game between talent and the harsh reality that surrounded her, but Lara was determined to win. Thus, between threads and needles, between shy compliments and sharp criticisms, the girl who one day found a broken sewing machine in the middle of the rags discovered that she could transform the world around her, starting with her own destiny. The fashion world might not be a fairy tale, but for her, it was the place where, finally, her colors began to come to life in sewing, the first line of a future full of possibilities. As the months went by, Lara's trajectory at the brand began to gain a dimension that she herself could hardly imagine. The incessant effort, the sleepless nights, and the unwavering determination began to blossom into visible results. The pieces that came out of his hands were not just clothes, but genuine manifestations of talent and creativity, capable of capturing glances and arousing emotions. Gradually, his ideas, previously viewed with skepticism, began to occupy a respected space within the studio, provoking interest and admiration even among those who initially underestimated it. The environment that had previously greeted her with murmurs of doubt and criticism now found itself in front of a young woman whose presence could no longer be ignored. The aura of inexperience was gradually replaced by a singular brilliance, the result of a rare combination of refined technique and artistic sensitivity. Lara didn't just master the tools of fashion, she reinvented them, imprinting her identity in every stitch, in every seam, in every detail that transformed a simple piece into a work. This growing recognition was not the result of chance, but of the constancy of passionate work and the courage to break with standards and expectations. One of the defining moments of this rise happened during the development of the brand's annual collection. Lara, who until then had contributed behind the scenes, received the opportunity to sign a piece that would be exhibited at the big fashion show, an event that brought together critics, influencers, and fashion lovers from all over the country. This piece represented more than a work. It was an extension of his soul, a reflection of the battles he had fought and the victories he had won. The bold and innovative dress she created combined unexpected shapes, contrasting fabrics, and a color palette that defied convention, revealing an authenticity that could not be ignored. When the model stepped on the runway wearing that creation, the impact was immediate and overwhelming. The audience, who usually watched predictable and safe performances, was surprised by the audacity and originality of the piece. The applause echoed with intensity, and for the first time, Lara's name began to circulate reverently in the corridors and on social networks. The stylist who had discovered and welcomed her at the beginning of her journey watched with emotion. The smile on her face was more than pride. It was the confirmation that she had correctly believed in the ability of that young woman. Lara left behind the image of the orphan who had arrived discredited and insecure. She was now a creator, an artist who turned dreams into tangible reality, a promise that was beginning to firmly cement itself in the fashion scene. His name, once whispered with doubt, now echoed as a symbol of innovation and courage. The industry, with its severe demands and relentless competition, was beginning to recognize in her something that went beyond technical talent, a vision, an identity that could not be easily copied or forgotten. This recognition, however, brought not only glories but also new challenges. With the success of the piece signed by her came even greater expectations, more intense demands, and the responsibility to remain faithful to the unique style that defined her, without losing the essence that made her creations so special. Lara knew that the road ahead would require even more effort, creativity, and endurance, as fashion was a territory that rewarded both innovation and the ability to constantly reinvent oneself. The pressure to surpass herself became a constant companion, but now she was no longer the insecure young woman who feared judgment. She was a professional who knew her worth and was willing to fight to expand it. With this new phase, new doors and opportunities also emerged. Invitations to participate in workshops, partnerships with exclusive fabric suppliers, and even the possibility of developing a mini collection under his curatorship began to appear. Lara felt that the horizon was expanding every day, but she also understood that each achievement should be sustained by the same dedication that had brought her there. The pressure to live up to expectations was no longer a burden, but a stimulus to continue evolving, exploring new techniques, and deepening their own language. While Lara's name began to circulate with respect and admiration at industry events, she remained true to what had driven her from the beginning, the desire to tell her story through fashion. With each creation, she sought to convey emotions, values, and experiences that went beyond the visual, involving those who observed her in a unique and true narrative. This ability to humanize her pieces, to make them speak to the public in an intimate and deep way, was what set her apart in a market saturated with ephemeral trends and soulless productions. But this ascent was not limited to external recognition. Lara was experiencing an equally powerful internal transformation. The confidence he had gained from seeing his talent validated by the industry reverberated in his attitude, in the decisions he made, and in the way he faced obstacles. The sleepless nights, the mistakes made, and the criticisms faced had become valuable learnings which strengthened her and made her grow as a person and professional. She knew that the journey would be long and that each new stage would require resilience, but she was ready to continue, driven by the passion that had always accompanied her. In addition, this trajectory of overcoming began to inspire others around him. For young people who, like her, faced difficulties and doubts, Lara's story became concrete proof that it was possible to turn adversity into fuel for success. His example showed that talent needed to be combined with perseverance and courage to break barriers and challenge expectations. In an environment where appearance and status often dominated, Lara brought a different narrative, based on authenticity and willpower. The path of the girl who sewed between scraps of fabric and fragments of hope was now transformed into a recognized and respected journey. She left marks not only on the clothes, but on the people who crossed her path, arousing attentive eyes and awakening feelings that went far beyond aesthetics. Lara's name was consolidated as a synonym for innovation with purpose, talent with soul, and the promise that fashion could be a powerful instrument of expression and personal transformation. At the same time as she grew professionally, Lara remained attentive to the roots that had formed her. The story he carried within him was a constant source of inspiration and motivation not to lose the connection with what really mattered. Each piece created was a silent tribute to the past, a way to honor the battles fought and the achievements celebrated. This deep relationship with her own trajectory helped to keep her creativity always renewed, fueling the search for new ways of telling stories through fashion. The combination of technique, sensitivity, and courage made Lara build an unmistakable style, which was beginning to be recognized not only by the industry, but also by an increasingly larger and more diverse audience. His work, previously restricted to the backstage of the brand, became the subject of conversations on social networks, specialized magazines, and industry events. The girl who had once been underestimated was now seen as an authentic and innovative voice, capable of influencing trends and opening paths for those who were still looking for their space. Behind this rise was a complexity that few people realized. The journey required Lara not only creativity, but also emotional balance and intelligence to deal with growing fame, the expectations of others, and her own fears. The pressure to stay relevant and surprise could be overwhelming, and the temptation to let go of the essence that made her unique was ever present. However, the strength that came from her story, the scars she carried, and the passion that did not fade, kept her firm and focused. This phase of Lara's life, marked by recognition and challenges, represented a crucial turning point. She was no longer just the young woman full of dreams and doubts, but an artist who was beginning to shape her legacy, who understood the power of her creations and the responsibility of being an inspiration to others. Every parade, every applause, every accolade was a reminder of the path traveled and the importance of continuing to move forward with integrity and courage. As her star shone brighter and brighter on the fashion scene, Lara knew that the future held surprises and even greater tests. The ambition to grow, to innovate, and to surpass herself remained alive, but always accompanied by the awareness that the true value lay in staying true to herself and to the purpose that had guided her from the beginning. The girl who once faced the silence of lonely nights with a sewing machine now carried the sound of applause and the glow of the spotlight, ready to continue writing her story with the same passion and determination. And so, between challenges and achievements, between the admiration of colleagues and the watchful eye of the market, Lara walked steadily, showing that true talent is not measured only by what you create, but by the willpower that moves every gesture. Every point, every dream woven with courage and authenticity. Fashion, which at first seemed like an unreachable world, was now transformed into a space where her voice could be heard and where she could finally be who she had always dreamed of being. The journey continued, pulsating and full of possibilities, and Lara was prepared to embrace each new chapter with the same restless heart that had driven her since day one. The transformation of Lara, who had once been an invisible girl, now showed itself in every detail of her work, in every choice of fabric, in every cut designed to tell a story. That opportunity in Paris was not just a performance, it was the culmination of years of struggle, sleepless nights, renunciations, and above all, the conviction that his talent deserved to shine. The Parisian catwalk, The stage where so many artists had left their marks now became the ground where Lara planted the seeds of a unique legacy. As the light focused on the catwalk, everything seemed to conspire to make that moment perfect. The attentive eyes of international critics, the almost palpable expectation of fashionistas, the vibration of the cameras, everything involved Lara in an atmosphere that mixed tension and enchantment. But there, in the depths of her heart, there was something deeper, a connection to her origins, to that girl who had been discredited, who had felt the weight of abandonment, and who now, even in the spotlight, remained true to her roots. Each piece in the collection carried a piece of that history, a silent cry of resistance and a celebration of beauty in imperfections. Paris was not just a city for Lara. He was the ultimate symbol of fashion, where dreams materialized and where his art finally gained the reverence he had always dreamed of. The standing ovation that echoed at the end of the show represented not only the acceptance of a demanding public, but the recognition of an artist who had dared to rise against all odds. The tears that slid down his face were not tears of sadness, but the genuine expression of a victory that only those who know the depth of the path can understand. In addition to the momentary glory, that event marked the beginning of a new phase. Lara felt that her work was beginning to transcend conventional fashion. His creations were no longer just clothes, but powerful messages that provoked reflections, aroused emotions, and inspired other invisible voices to seek their space. The challenge now was to stay true to his vision as he navigated the complex universe of the fashion industry, where commercial pressures and changing trends could easily dilute the true meaning of his art. At this point in the trajectory, Lara realized that her journey was not lonely. Doors that were previously closed began to open to other marginalized talents, and their influence, silent but forceful, helped transform the paradigms of a historically closed and elitist sector. The connection with her origins became not only a motivating force, but also a commitment to social responsibility, which drove her to create opportunities for those who, like her, had stories to tell and talents to develop. Over time, the fashion world absorbed Lara's authenticity, recognizing that true innovation is born from the courage to be different, to tell real stories, to break pre-established patterns. His collection in Paris became a reference, an inspiration for young designers who sought meaning in their work beyond the ephemeral brilliance of passing trends. Thus, Lara not only earned respect, but also built a platform where art and purpose went hand in hand. Behind the applause and the brightness of the lights, she continued to dedicate herself to the creative process with the same passion and determination as at the beginning. The sewing machine that had accompanied her since the difficult times was still present, not as a simple instrument, but as a symbol of resistance and transformation. Each point was a statement that the past, as painful as it was, does not define who she is, but strengthens her essence. And so, as fame and recognition grew, Lara found in the simplicity of her roots the continuous inspiration to reinvent fashion, to humanize it, and make it a means of expression for those who previously had no voice. What started as a need for survival has become a life mission, where talent is combined with courage and success with empathy. At this point in her career, Lara was no longer just a designer, but a silent leader who showed the world that true fashion goes far beyond the catwalks. It is in the strength of each person who fights to be seen, heard, and valued. This deep and transformative vision cemented his position as one of the most influential figures in the contemporary landscape, redefining standards and opening paths that until then seemed unattainable for someone with his story. As the lights in Paris went out and the world absorbed the intensity of that show, Lara's trajectory expanded into possibilities, new challenges, stories yet to be told. The girl who once sewed alone in the solitude of a room now carried in her hands the power to transform lives, inspire change, and make fashion a tool for inclusion and identity. Every step taken in that city, every look directed at her, every compliment received, did not erase the awareness of the responsibility she carried with her. Lara knew that her art was, above all, a link between the past and the future, a bridge that united shattered dreams with reconstructed realities, an invitation for everyone to recognize their value and their place in the world. And it was thus, immersed in this pulsating energy, that Lara's story continued to unfold, woven with the same delicacy and firmness that marked her creations, ready to reveal new chapters, even greater challenges and achievements that would echo her name for a long time. The trajectory that once seemed like a distant dream was now a solid and meaningful journey in which the impossible became reality, one sewing stitch at a time. Lara was not only a stylist who had conquered the fashion world, she had become a living symbol of transformation and hope, a light that illuminated paths previously forgotten by society. His trajectory was not limited to personal achievements or the ephemeral brilliance of the catwalks, but to the profound impact that his example generated in thousands of lives that recognized themselves in his history. Each interview, each magazine cover, each television program she received was not only a moment of public recognition, but an opportunity to give voice to those who were almost always silenced, invisible to the great narratives. Despite the growing fame and spotlight that now followed her, Lara maintained humility and connection to her origins as unshakable foundations. She knew that the true value of her success lay in the ability to open doors for those who, like her, had talent and dreams, but not the means to make them come true. It was with this conviction that his social project was born, an initiative that went beyond the simple act of teaching how to sew. It was a mission to rebuild lives, to give real tools of transformation to underprivileged girls who would otherwise remain invisible, trapped in a cycle of abandonment and lack of opportunities. By taking sewing machines to orphanages and vulnerable communities, Lara didn't just deliver an object, but planted the seed of hope and independence. Each point given by those girls was a gesture of resistance, an affirmation that they also had the right to dream and create. The project grew, gained strength and recognition, becoming a support network that connected stories of overcoming similar to his. And when she saw each smile of a girl who was beginning to discover her talent, Lara felt a mirror that reflected her own past, her own pains transformed into art and strength. In those seams, in the threads that intertwined under the delicate and determined hands of the young apprentices, was concrete proof that abandonment does not have to be the end of the story. The girl who had once been humiliated, who had suffered at the hands of prejudice and indifference, was now applauded on international stages, but more than that, she was the weaver of a network of solidarity and empowerment. Her talent, previously viewed with suspicion, had become the language through which she told not only her own story, but that of so many others who found in the clothes created a form of expression and liberation. Lara's trajectory showed that pain, although inevitable, can be transformed into a creative force, capable of generating beauty, social impact, and change. It was not just about winning in one's career, but about building a legacy that transcended the ephemerality of fashion. The courage that drove her forward, even when everything seemed to conspire against her, was the same one that inspired girls to believe in themselves, to discover that talent is waiting for opportunities, that no one is born without value, only without someone who believes in them. The girl who sewed her own story proved that the impossible can be deconstructed, that the void of abandonment can be filled with creativity and willpower, and that with determination, even those who have nothing can conquer everything. His name was no longer just a sigh in the crowd, but a cry of hope, a reference for those who seek talent and overcoming the key to transforming realities. While the world continued to applaud her collections, Lara continued to expand her project, understanding that her mission went far beyond fashion. It was a commitment to humanity, a call for each girl to find her way, her voice, her art. And it was in this purpose that she found a new way of being an artist, not only creating clothes, but sewing dreams, reconstructing stories and writing, point by point, a future where talent could flourish even in the most difficult circumstances. Thus, the girl who was once invisible has become a reference for all those who need a living example of how courage, combined with talent and solidarity, can transform not only a life, but an entire universe around it. Sewing that began as an act of survival has become a link that unites past, present, and future, showing that the true art is in touching and transforming lives. And in this constant movement, Lara continues tirelessly, building new paths and inspiring others to do the same, because the story she sowed is still far from being completed. This story goes beyond fashion. It's a powerful reminder that giving up never has to be an option. Lara could have resigned herself to what the world said about her, but she chose to believe, fight, and turn every difficulty into an impulse to move forward. And have you ever stopped to think about what you are facing now? What challenge, what wound can be the fuel for your own transformation? Maybe that talent, that idea, or that dream that seems forgotten is actually your sewing machine. The starting point for creating a new path. The difference is in never stopping sewing, building, reinventing yourself with what you have, even if it seems little. If you've made it this far, it means that this message resonated with you. Leave here in the comments "I'm with you until the end" to show that this story really touched. And if this connection made sense, give it a like. Because each gesture, like this, helps us to continue bringing content that truly inspires. There is a video here on the side that tells a similar story, full of challenges and overcoming. Click there and stay with me there, because the path to transform life is just beginning.